when two major figures in French cinema cross paths, the story can never be simply private. It becomes a collective narrative, a source of fantasy, a field of analysis. That's exactly what happened when Christophe Lambert and Sophie Marceau made their relationship official. But long before the insistent, repeated, almost obsessive question of why they never had children together arose, there were first two distinct, powerful trajectories already loaded with history, wounds, and family responsibilities. Christophe Lambert, a Franco-American actor who rose to fame in the 1980s, very early on portrayed an image of an almost enigmatic, solitary man. Your international success with Greystock and an Islander forged a myth, that of the romantic warrior hero who transcends eras. But behind this image, there is a man marked by the demands of the profession, constant travel, and a career built between two continents. The film boom catapulted Sophie Marceau to stardom at 14. She immediately became the face of French adolescence in the 1980s. Very quickly, she surpassed her status as a youth icon to become a demanding actress, choosing complex, sometimes daring, roles that were far from cliches. Their meeting did not unite two strangers seeking to build themselves. It brought together two already established personalities, already parents on their own, already confronted with the realities of adult life. This is an essential point, because when a couple forms late in life after previous relationships, the dynamic is never that of an absolute beginning. It is a continuity, an adjustment, a relationship under constant surveillance. From their first public appearances, the press seized on the story. People magazine's proliferate front pages. The most glamorous couple in French cinema, the unexpected love, the return of romance. Their differences in temperament were intriguing. Lambert appeared reserved, almost silent in front of the cameras. Marceau, more direct, sometimes ironic, assumed his positions, his commitments, his independence. Soon, the press moved beyond simply reporting. She projects. In the collective imagination, a famous couple must go through certain stages: officialization, cohabitation, marriage, possibly a child. This almost mechanical narrative grid structures the media gaze. From then on, a question begins to circulate, first timidly and then insistently. Will they have a child together? The silent pressure surrounding motherhood and fatherhood. It is striking to observe to what extent society projects its own standards onto celebrities. In the case of Sophie Marceau, this pressure is all the stronger because the actress has always been perceived as a romantic figure. The public has grown up with her. Some unconsciously feel like they know her private life. However, motherhood for a famous woman quickly becomes a public subject. Every appearance is scrutinized, every silhouette is commented on, every silence is interpreted. For Christophe Lambert, the question takes on another dimension, that of the already mature man, whose international career involves constant travel. But instead of addressing these realities with nuance, the tabloids simplify. If there is no child together, there must be a hidden reason. This is where the construction of a media myth begins. Between reality and media narrative, it is important to remember a fundamental principle of responsible journalism. The absence of information does not mean the existence of a secret. The lack of official announcement regarding their plans for children is gradually being transformed into a mystery in media coverage of their relationship. Theories abound. Priority to career, divergence of desires, age constraints, assumed personal choice. But the main parties concerned never turn this subject into a public debate. And perhaps that is the most important thing. Silence is not an enigma to be solved. Sometimes it is simply a boundary. An adult love story, far from idealized scenarios. What characterizes the relationship between Christophe Lambert and Sophie Marceau is its maturity. They are not two young actors seeking to build a traditional family future. They are two adults who have already gone through unions, separations, and parental responsibilities. In this context, the very idea of having a child together no longer necessarily responds to a symbolic imperative. Adult love does not always seek to produce offspring to legitimize itself. It can exist for its own sake. But this vision, simple as it may be, conflicts with the collective imagination. The children are seen by the public as the pinnacle of a relationship, the creation of a public issue. How does an intimate issue become a national question? The mechanism is well known. A famous relationship is publicized. Specialist journalists control each step. The absence of an expected event becomes a subject. The subject becomes speculation. The speculation becomes a mystery. In the case of Lambert and Marceau, this process took hold gradually. Their discretion paradoxically fueled curiosity. What this story reveals about our times is that, more than just a question about a couple, this affair reveals a profound transformation in the relationship between celebrity and intimacy. Today, the absence of an explanation is perceived as a void to be filled. The public demands transparency, confession, and justification. But do public figures have an obligation to explain their family choices? But the question goes beyond Christophe Lambert and Sophie Marceau. It touches on our modern conception of fame, timeline of a love affair and its media narrative. The meeting was a late but decisive encounter. When they got together in the mid-2000s, they were no longer the young icons of the 80s. Christophe Lambert had already experienced high-profile relationships, breakups, and in a demanding international career. Sophie Marceau had already experienced several great love stories and was already a mother. Their meeting was not part of the madness of a youth that needed to be built, but of the maturity of adults who had already experienced the illusions and realities of being in a relationship. And that changed everything. In interviews from the time, he spoke more of a bond than of flamboyant passion, noir. They spoke of mutual admiration, understanding, and respect. This vocabulary, less spectacular than that of love at first sight, reflects a different dynamic. A chosen, well-considered union, the officialization and the involuntary staging. As is often the case in the world of cinema, the officialization is not made by press release, but by image. Public appearance, a red carpet, a tender gesture captured by photographers. From then on, the media machine kicks into gear. The couple becomes a symbol that of two great figures of French cinema united. The international press also takes an interest in them, particularly because of Lambert's Hollywood career and Marceau's international reputation. Soon, the narrative goes beyond just a relationship announcement. The headlines change. A new beginning, love rediscovered, towards a new life together. In this rhetoric, the idea of a new life implicitly implies the possibility of a child together. This is where the question begins to arise. The weight of age and media interpretation. At the time when their relationship is consolidated, both are already in an advanced phase of their adult life. In a society still heavily influenced by biological and cultural norms, age immediately becomes a point of analysis for commentators. Some media outlets emphasize the couple's maturity. Others, more sensationalist ones, evoke the last chances of motherhood. This shift is revealing. Instead of considering the couple for what they are, the press seeks to project a biological timetable. However, neither Lambert nor Marceau make any public statements indicating a joint parental project. No announcement doesn't stop speculation. Interviews, what was said and especially what was not said. In the interviews given during their relationship, the two actors mainly talk about cinema, their artistic project, their vision of the profession, and the difficulty of maintaining a private life. The subject of a child together is never central. When the question is asked, it is often elegantly avoided or reformulated to address broader themes. Personal balance, happiness, freedom, or this media silence is crucial. It indicates that the couple never wanted to turn the subject into a public debate. But paradoxically, this choice of restraint fuels curiosity, transforming an absence into a mystery. As the years go by without an announcement of pregnancy or parental plans, some media outlets adopt a different tone. The headlines become questioning. Why no children? A choice or a constraint? A secret divergence? This phenomenon is not unique to this couple. It is part of a broader trend in the treatment of celebrities. In the contemporary media landscape, a famous couple is often perceived as a story in episodes. Each expected step becomes a plot. Each absence becomes a suspense. Thus, the absence of a common child gradually transforms into an enigma. But an enigma implies a secret. Nothing shows that one exists. Invisible internal dynamics. Every couple has a dynamic that escapes outside observers. In the case of Lambert and Marceau, several objective factors can be mentioned without entering into speculation. They were already parents on their own. Their careers required frequent travel. They were at an age when priorities change. Their relationship formed in a media-saturated context. Under these conditions, the question of a child together cannot be analyzed according to the same parameters as a 30-something couple starting out together. But the tabloid press often simplifies its complex realities. The separation and interpreted turning point. When their separation is announced several years later, some media outlets retroactively rewrite this story. What was previously a simple fact, the absence of children together becomes, in some analyses, proof of a supposed incompatibility. It is a classic mechanism. After a breakup, commentators look for warning signs. However, no official statement links their separation to this issue. The reality of a couple is always more nuanced than the media narrative. The role of the public in constructing the story, it would be unfair to attribute all the responsibility to the media. The public itself participates in this dynamic. Forums, social networks, and comments have fueled hypotheses. In the collective imagination, a couple without a common child is sometimes perceived as complete. This deeply rooted cultural perception influences the way stories are told. Lambert and Marceau were thus integrated, despite themselves, into a narrative that went beyond their own will. The chronology of their relationship shows one essential thing. There were never any dramatic declarations, sensational revelations, or secret confessions concerning the absence of a common child. There was a late meeting, a relationship built in maturity, constant discretion, and a respectful separation. The truth revealed is perhaps not a hidden secret, but a simpler reality. Not all famous couples fit the scenarios that the public projects onto them. In the next chapter, we will analyze in more depth the question of voluntary choice versus constraint, the place of parenthood in the actors' careers, and what their story reveals about the evolution of contemporary family models. After tracing the timeline of the relationship and analyzing the media construction surrounding their couple, it is time to address the heart of the matter, the question of choice. Because behind the repeated question of why Christophe Lambert and Sophie Marceau never had children together lies a deeper reflection. What does parenthood mean when you are a public figure? Parenthood is not a necessary step in the collective imagination. The construction of a couple seems to follow an almost narrative pattern. Meeting, union, child, continuity. But this structure is more a matter of cultural model than of universal obligation. Christophe Lambert had a child before his relationship with Sophie Marceau. Sophie Marceau herself had already experienced motherhood. Therefore, the idea that a child together would be necessary to validate their relationship is based on an external projection. Many blended couples, especially at a later age, do not feel the need to have a child together to cement their relationship. Adult love often works differently. He no longer seeks to build a lineage, but to find a balance. Age is a real but often caricatured factor. The biological question has been raised in some media, sometimes clumsily, yet this issue demands a non-sensationalist approach. Late motherhood is more common today than it used to be, but it remains a complex decision. It involves medical considerations, personal choices, a long-term outlook on the stability of the couple, and reflection on the energy required to raise a child. For an actor or actress whose career requires placements, extended filming, and international promotion, the decision can become even more delicate. But it is essential to distinguish. The absence of children does not mean impossibility. It can simply reflect a considered choice. Given the pressure exerted on famous women, we must also recognize a media asymmetry. In journalistic coverage, the question of children is often directed at the woman. Sophie Marceau, an iconic figure in French cinema, has been questioned throughout her career about her private life, motherhood, and her balance between career and family. This pressure is based on a cultural heritage. Motherhood is still perceived as an essential feminine achievement. However, a woman can be fully fulfilled without having multiple pregnancies. The freedom to choose or not to choose is an integral part of modern autonomy. Fame as a structural constraint, being famous profoundly changes the experience of parenthood. Each pregnancy becomes a public announcement. Each child is photographed. Each parental separation becomes a media affair. In this context, some couples choose maximum discretion. For Lambert and Marceau, whose relationship was already highly publicized, adding a child together would have meant increasing the exposure even more. The question can therefore be reversed. In a world where privacy is constantly threatened, isn't the absence of a child together also a form of protection? Career priorities? At the time of their relationship, the two actors were actively pursuing their artistic projects. Sophie Marceau balanced art house films, big productions, and personal activism. Christophe Lambert continued to navigate between international production and more confidential projects. Cinema is a demanding, unpredictable profession, often incompatible with a stable routine. Having a child implies a form of geographical and temporal stability. However, the careers of international actors do not follow this rhythm. The myth of the hidden truth. When the media uses the expression truth revealed, they suggest the existence of a long-concealed secret. But in this specific case, no spectacular confession has come to confirm any dramatic revelation. The reality seems simpler. The couple never made the question of having a child together a public goal. The real revelation could therefore be this: there was perhaps nothing to reveal. The couple as an autonomous space. A romantic relationship is not a social contract designed to satisfy the collective imagination. It is a private space negotiated between two individuals. Lambert and Marceau lived together for several years. Their story existed independently of external expectations. The decision, explicit or implicit, not to have children together is part of this autonomy. And it is precisely this autonomy that sometimes disturbs public opinion. A change in family models. The story is part of a broader evolution in contemporary family models. Durable to the blended families, childless couples, and deferred or chosen parenthood have been more visible. However, the collective imagination remains attached to a traditional model. In this sense, the question asked about Lambert and Marceau reveals more about our relationship with norms than any anomaly in their relationship, the separation, and the media reinterpretation. When absence becomes a clue, every media-covered love story goes through two phases, one of celebration and one of reinterpretation. When the separation of Christophe Lambert and Sophie Marceau is announced, the tone changes. Where the press once described an elegant and mature couple, it now looks for explanations. And in this retrospective movement, the absence of children together suddenly becomes a central narrative element. The post-breakup mechanism reconstructs the past. There is a well-known journalistic reflex. After a breakup, we look for warning signs. Every detail of the past is reinterpreted. Every silence becomes suspect. Every difference in temperament becomes a fundamental divergence. In the case of Lambert and Marceau, the question that was already circulating widely, why they didn't have children together, takes on a new dimension. Some articles suggest, without ever stating it clearly, that this absence could have weakened the couple. But no official statement has come to confirm such a hypothesis. The need for an identifiable cause. Society has difficulty accepting the idea that a couple can simply separate without dramatic events. We look for causes, mistakes, spectacular breakups. However, in this story, the separation is announced in a sober, almost administrative manner. No scandal, no public accusation. The media fills this narrative void, and the absence of children together becomes a practical clue, a tangible element around which to build an interpretation. This faulty causal reasoning connects the absence of children to the relationship's end. A couple can have children and separate. A couple can have none and last a lifetime. Parenthood was neither a guarantee of stability nor proof of absolute commitment. In the case of Lambert and Marceau, no public statements suggest that this issue constituted a central conflict. The temptation to link these two facts, childlessness and separation, responds more to a narrative logic than to a demonstrated reality. The different perspectives on each. An interesting phenomenon emerges in the media coverage after the breakup. Sophie Marceau is often described as independent, demanding, and loyal to her personal freedom. Christophe Lambert is sometimes presented as more reserved, discreet, even mysterious. These portraits subtly influence the interpretation of the facts. Some comments suggest that their visions of life may have diverged, but here again, no concrete evidence supports this idea. These are projections. Separation is narrative liberation. After the breakup, each continues on their own path. Sophie Marceau continues to choose her projects selectively, alternating between film and theater, public speaking, and periods of withdrawal. Christophe Lambert continues his career between international production and occasional appearances. Their separation did not give rise to a media war or a sensational revelation, and is precisely this lack of drama that is intriguing. Because in a media landscape accustomed to scandal, sobriety becomes almost suspect. Intimacy claimed. It is striking to note that neither of them turned their breakup into a spectacle. No confessional book, no exclusive accusatory interviews, no shocking truth revealed years later. This silence, consistent with their attitude during the relationship, suggests a clear line preserved: intimacy. However, in a media culture based on permanent exposure, this holding back, the public faced with the unfinished. Why does this question? Why no children together continue to come up even after the separation? Because it symbolically represents a form of incompleteness. In the collective imagination, the common child embodies the culmination. His absence leaves an impression of an incomplete story. But this perception is based on a traditional model of the couple, not on a universal necessity. Lambert and Marceau had a real, lasting, meaningful relationship. It did not need to have produced offspring to be legitimate. The story has changed over time. Over the years, the media tone has changed. The question has become less insistent. The couple is now a thing of the past, but the initial question remains in some journalistic archives as an enigma that has never been solved. This phenomenon shows how much the media narrative survives the fact itself. The separation of Christophe Lambert and Sophie Marceau did not reveal any hidden secrets. Above all, it triggered a classic mechanism: rereading the past in light of the breakup. The absence of a child together, once a simple fact, has become an explanatory hypothesis in some discourses. However, no tangible evidence confirms this interpretation. What does this story say about our celebrity relationship? Why do we demand revealed truths when sometimes there are only personal choices? Well, what does this case show us about the evolution of couples and parenting today? This is perhaps where the real answer lies. The truth behind the question, celebrity, projection, and personal freedom. After going through the different stages of this story, the meeting, the media coverage, the persistent question of a common child, then the separation and its reinterpretation, there remains a larger question to examine. Why does this question continue to fascinate? Why, years after the end of their relationship, do some people continue to ask why Christophe Lambert and Sophie Marceau never had children together? To answer this, we must go beyond the couple themselves and analyze our collective relationship with celebrity, the myth of the accomplished couple. In the Western imagination, a fulfilled couple often goes through parenthood. This narrative pattern is deeply rooted. Meeting arrow, love arrow, commitment arrow, child arrow, continuity. When this path is not followed, a feeling of incompleteness appears. In the case of Christophe Lambert and Sophie Marceau, this absence was perceived as an anomaly that needs to be explained. But the very idea that a couple needs offspring to be complete is based on a social norm, not a universal truth. Celebrity as a mirror of our expectations. Celebrities play a symbolic role. They embody models, dreams, and projections. When two such iconic figures come together, the public unconsciously projects a logical outcome: marriage, children, and the ideal blended family. If this outcome does not materialize, narrative frustration arises. But this frustration does not belong to the couple. It belongs to the outside world. Creating a secret, the term revealed truth hints at a long-hidden mystery. However, upon analysis, no public element suggests a dramatic secret. There was no late confession, no shocking revelation, no hidden truth about a fundamental incompatibility linked to parenthood. The only observable reality is this: they had a relationship and then separated. The rest is up to interpretation. The right to silent choice. In our contemporary societies, individual freedom is claimed as a central value. However, when it comes to celebrity, this freedom sometimes seems conditional, but explanations are demanded, revelations are demanded, secrets are suspected. But the explicit or implicit choice not to have a child together is a personal decision. Whether it is a conscious choice, a tacit consensus, an absence of sheer desire, or simply a lack of a plan, it remains a private matter. A change in mentalities. It is interesting to note that the perception of childless couples is gradually changing. More and more public figures are now taking unconventional paths. The single model of the traditional nuclear family is losing its exclusivity. In this context, the story of Lambert and Marceau seems less like an enigma than a reflection of a cultural transition, the real revelation. So what is the truth? It is neither dramatic nor sensational. It is based on a simple reality. You adults, already parents, each on their own, have had a relationship without feeling or publicly announcing the need to have a child together. And this absence is not necessarily a lack. It can be a choice, or simply a lack of priority. The real revelation is therefore not a hidden secret, but the subsequent realization. We often seek extraordinary explanations for ordinary realities. What this story teaches us, the story of Christophe Lambert and Sophie Marceau reveals more about our times than about their intimacy. It shows our need for complete narration, our difficulty in accepting silence, our tendency to transform absence into mystery. But it also reminds us that fame does not eliminate the right to intimacy. Why did Christophe Lambert never have children with Sophie Marceau? Because not all couples have them. Because parenthood is not a narrative obligation. Because adult love can exist without producing common offspring, and because certain decisions belong solely to those who live them. The revealed truth is therefore not a scandal, it is a lesson in freedom. Perhaps it is time to stop looking for secrets where there are only choices. And perhaps this is ultimately the only revelation worth remembering.